Okay, let's start putting together everything we've learned so far in the course and build this coffee shop website. I find building these practice websites, even though they're fairly simple, is a really great way to build your skill and to sort of solidify all of the understanding of everything we've done so far. So here we go. Again, this is the design that we're creating, and I have the Photoshop file open, which we'll be referring to throughout this project. You can open it yourself if you want to. So before we start getting start working on the design, let's get the basic page structure in place. You'll notice if you open up the page in the code editor, I'm going to use Dreamweaver, you'll notice we have the top of the page already in place. And again, here's some information that we're already fairly familiar with. The HTML tags open and close the document. We've got the doc type telling us that it's an HTML5 document, and the meta care set tag, and all of the basic tags we're familiar with. The first thing we'll want to do is change the title to Coffee Shop Home. So let's go ahead and open this up. I'm going to come here to my folder, open up the index file in Dreamweaver, and here it is. Go to code view here. Oh, look at that. I need to get some basic HTML in place here. So one more time, we'll type this stuff in. So I need the doc type, HTML. I need the HTML tags. I need the head tags. Inside the head tag we get the meta care set. I can even just pick it from the list here. UTF-8, pick that from the list. Title. Coffee Shop Home. And then we need our body tags. Should be fairly familiar with these basic tags for now. Okay, so now we're ready to start building up our page. What's unhappy about this over here? Nothing. Okay. Save that. There we go. Alright. Whoops, I need my slides. There we go. So we've got that in place. Coffee Shop Home. And then let's take a look at the design again and sort of think about what we need to do here. We have a section centered on the page, or the main content of the page. And then inside that main content of the page, we have a header. And then we'll have the navigation will float to the left. I have this article floating to the right. It could actually float to the left, but in this case I'm floating it to the right. And then we have the footer that clears both those floats. So what sort of markup do we need in order to make that work? You should be familiar with this already. Let's take a look and see. So I put the whole thing inside of a section, and then I've got the header, the nav, the article, and the footer. The section could be a div. In this case I use section, but it really could be a div. Let's go ahead and put that in. So I've got a section. And really do make sure you open and close the element at the same time. Always type from the outside in. That will keep you from making a lot of mistakes. In Dreamweaver, you're kind of lucky because when you type the open section tag, it adds the closing one automatically. Header. and then we've got the nav, and then we've got the article, and then we've got the footer. Oops. Footer. There we go. And these can go, you can separate them onto their own lines because we're going to put stuff inside of them if you want. But this is the basic structure for the page. And that's enough for this video. Now that we have the basic structure of the page in place, it's time to start filling out that structure with some content. The very first thing is to add the header image into the header. And at this point, for this very simple layout, the header is only going to contain an image. It's kind of unusual for an actual design, but in an attempt to keep this one simple, this is how I'm doing this one. Okay, so inside the header here, we will add an image. It's an image tag, so it's like that. And then we add the source, src. And I can even just, if I'm using Dreamweaver, you can actually just go down to images and pick the correct image from the list rather than typing it all out. And then I need an alt tag, an alt attribute, logo or something like that. I think that's what I put over here on my slides. Coffee shop logo, sure. And then for the navigation, we're going to have an unordered list with list items inside of it. But I want to make sure you type it like this. Type it from the outside in. Make sure you do it like this. So inside the nav, I'm going to add the UL, open and close it, and then add a list item inside the UL, open and close that, and then inside there I'm going to add an anchor tag which opens and closes, and then inside the anchor tag is the text that's going to be the actual link, which in this case is Our Roasters. Let me check my slide here. Our Roasters. And then inside the anchor tag, we're going to add our href attribute. And for right now, it's going to link to nothing, so I just put a hashtag or a pound sign in there. Depending on how old you are, you'll call it a hashtag or a pound sign. Once I have one of these list items done, you can just copy the list item and paste it 3 more times. Paste, 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 and then just change the text inside the link. So what do I have here? Let's go back and check. Fresh baked goods, about our shop, events and happenings. So back here, fresh baked goods, about our shop, events and happenings. Now this character, this ampersand here, is kind of a special character, and to make sure that browsers are going to render it properly, what we need to do is change it to an HTML entity. And in HTML, you can make entities out of any character that you want to display. I think I have a slide about this over here. So it's amp and amp semicolon. You'll see, but I'm going to go forward with my slides here because it shows the adding of the list item, the adding of the anchor tags, the adding of the text, the adding of the href. Always typing from the outside in. That's the most certain way you won't run into typos if you do it from the outside in. Just get into the habit of doing that. It takes a little bit of an effort, but if you just type this from left to right, just the way you see it here, the chances that you're going to miss an angle bracket or a quote mark or an equal sign are much higher than if you type it from the outside in. And on top of that, you'll understand how the HTML works better, what's inside of what, and how it all comes together if you're typing from the outside in. Okay, so yeah, here it is here, HTML entity. So the HTML entity will go ahead and fix that. So over here, how do I get those? If you type ampersand in Dreamweaver, you actually get this list, and you can scroll through here and see what these different entities are. You can also go to Google and Google HTML entities to figure out exactly which one does what. But I happen to know that this one is and amp. Oops. And you can see it comes up here. And it ends with a semicolon. And that will actually create the ampersand character in the browser. And this is the safer way to do it. Some browsers will actually render the ampersand if you just type it there, but some will not. Okay, so we've got that. Next thing I need to do is add some content here in the article. So I have an H2 and then I have a couple paragraphs inside the article. So let's go ahead and do that, and then that'll be it for this video. So down here I have an H2, open and close, and I can either just type in this title, or if you have the Photoshop file open, you can actually come back to the Photoshop file, use the T tool, come in here and just use Command A to select the text, Command C to copy it, and then come back out here and paste it in there. Same thing here. Open and close the paragraph, and then I will go back to the Photoshop file. If you don't have Photoshop and you're doing this without Photoshop, you can just type the title yourself, and then you don't really have to use this text. You could put any text in here, just make it about this amount of text so that you end up with something that looks similar in the end. But you could just go get some lorem ipsum text or something like that. But I'm just going to copy that text and paste it in here, and you can see I need a few more paragraphs here, so I'm going to close this paragraph here, tab this in, open the paragraph there, close this paragraph here. It's a little tedious, but this is the way this is going to work. And then tab that in and open that paragraph there. Now I've got basically the content of my page in place, and that's enough for this video. In this video we will add the content for the footer and link up a style sheet and start getting some styles going. Okay, so let's go ahead and add this content to the footer. And again, I'm just going to go to the Photoshop file, just as I did before. And if you don't have Photoshop, you could just type this stuff in. But it's a little bit easier if you have Photoshop, because then you don't have to type it all. I'm just going to come here and select all of that content. Again, I'm just doing that on my keyboard with Command A, or on Windows Control A, and then Control C to copy, or Command C on the Mac. And then over here, come into my footer, and I'm just going to add a paragraph again and paste that stuff right in there. Okay, and in this case I really want just a break here. On Dreamweaver you can put your cursor there and do shift return, and it will add a break tag. And then I can close the paragraph here, and then the phone number will be in its own paragraph. Okay, so that gets us the content for the footer. And this is all of the content for the page. If I save this page, if you go view it by clicking Live View, it's not going to look very good. We don't have any design on here at all. Go back to code, or also what you could do is open up a web browser like Chrome. Here I am in Chrome, and open desktop coffee shop start. Here's my index file, and here it is in the Chrome browser. And it doesn't look particularly good. We don't have any design yet, but as we go along here we will be adding design. Okay, so in order to get the design going, we need to add a style sheet. So up here in the head, I'm going to add, after the title, a link tag, link. It's a self-closing tag. You don't need one with a slash. And then inside the link tag, it gets two attributes, href, and at this point I'm just going to type in here styles.css, and we need the relative attribute as well, rel equals quote style sheet. That means that the relationship of this file to this file is that this is a style sheet, and your style sheet will not work unless you have this attribute on here and that you spell style sheet right. One of the big mistakes is people spell style sheet wrong in here, and then their styles don't work. Okay, so we've got that, so we want to save that, and now we need this file. We need to make this file, because in our folder we don't have that styles.css, so I need a styles.css file right here. So in Dreamweaver, I'm just going to make a new file, make it a CSS file, create, and save it in that folder. And here I can tell I'm not in the correct folder. I'm in my documents folder. I need to go to the desktop, or the coffee shop start folder. I need to be in this folder, and I want to call it styles.css inside the coffee shop start folder. Styles.css, so that when I go back and look over here, I now have styles.css in the same folder as my index file. If you've done that correctly, then when you come back here to your HTML file, you should have this little lozenge here, source code styles. When I click on this, it should come up and show my style sheet. I don't even need this file open anymore. I can close it if you're in Dreamweaver. If you're using Atom or something else, on the sidebar you'll be able to see styles, and you should be able to go back and forth between your files that way. If you click on this and it doesn't come up, it says the file is missing, you either type the name wrong here, or you typed the name wrong here, or you put it someplace else. It's not in the folder. So make sure everything is working before you go on, and make sure that you can access that style sheet. Okay, that's enough for this video. Okay, so now we have all of the content and the basic structure of our file in place in HTML. The boring part is done, and we can start working on making our website look better by adding the styling. We've linked the style sheet, we're ready to go. So the very first thing I'm going to put in here is a very simple reset script. So let's go ahead and add that over here in Dreamweaver under styles here. You can get rid of this thing or you can leave it, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to get rid of it just to make my page a little bit cleaner. I'm going to use an asterisk. An asterisk, shift and 8 on the keyboard, is like a wild card. It means all elements. And I'm going to set margin to 0 and padding to 0. And you'll notice that when you do this, what we had before in our browser is now a little bit different. When I go to live view now, everything's been squished down. Like there's no margin and padding on any of these elements. This thing is right up against the edge of the page. This is a very simple reset script. We're going to replace it with a more sophisticated one later. But for right now, I just want to get rid of all the margins and padding on everything, just so I'm starting with kind of a blank setup so I know exactly what I'm going to be putting where. And I can make it all work just the way I want it to work. Okay, so there's that, and then the next rule is we're going to set some basic settings for the whole page. Okay, so this is the body rule. And I'll set the font family, the color of the text, and the background color of the page. Okay, so let's do that. So body, body, and I'm going to set the font family, font-family, Arial, and then sans serif What this does is, if the computer that's reading this page has Arial, and almost all computers do, it will use that. If it doesn't, it will use the default sans serif font. Okay, so that's called a font stack. And you can put multiple fonts in the font stack and it'll go down the stack. If it has this one, it'll use that. If it has the next one, it'll use that. And if it has the next one, it'll use that. And then the very last one usually is, the generic sans serif that's on the computer. Okay, and why am I using Arial? Well, if you go back to the design over here, this is why it's useful to have Photoshop. If I click on here with my T-tool, you'll notice it's using Arial. If I click on a different piece of text in here, you'll notice that's using Arial. So you'll notice that the whole document is using Arial. And in fact, I can even come in here and see what color that text is. And here it is, DF, 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 kind of a light gray. So I'm going to copy that code right there. And that's my font color. So part of the process of doing web production is following the design as closely as you possibly can. Now, you may have created the design. In this case, I did actually create this file, this design for this coffee shop, but perhaps somebody's given it to you. Perhaps you're just doing the production. I've done that kind of work as well, where I'm not doing the design work. Somebody else is doing the design work, and they're giving me these files and saying, I really want to make my website look like this, and it's my job to make it as close as I possibly can to the design in the file they gave me. And it may not be absolutely pixel perfect, particularly with typography. What happens is that the way a browser renders a typeface is slightly different than the way Photoshop or Illustrator renders it. And so, spacing might be a tiny bit off on typography in particular, but everything else we want to try to get as close as possible to the actual file. And then I can use my eyedropper to figure out what this color is here, and click on this thing down here and see, look at there's the color right there. That's my background color. I can copy that and come over here and do background. Oops. Ugh. Background color. And if we go back to the slides, those should match what I had in my slides. There's my background color. Okay, next thing to pay attention to is our big ideas in CSS. One of the big ideas you'll remember is inheritance. So my whole page is going to inherit using this typeface. So I only have to set it once on the body. I don't have to set every element to be using Arial. I can set it once for the body, and the rest of the elements will inherit it. Same thing for the color of the type, and the background color is specifically going to be for the body. Okay, we move on next, and I've got my section. And the section is going to have a, let's see, what did I put in here? It's going to have a width of 960 pixels, margin auto, and it's going to have a different background color. Width 960 pixels, margin auto. You can see I don't even have to type that much of it, because you can actually just have it pop up and press return or enter on your keyboard and it'll put right in. Okay, now why width 960 pixels? Well, let's go back to our design over here, and if I use my marquee and measure from here to here, oh my goodness, it's measuring in inches. That's not what I want. I'm really glad that happened, because it gives me the opportunity to show you how to get it to measure in pixels. So under the View menu, you can choose Rulers. View, Show Rulers. And on the rulers, you can hold down Control on your keyboard and choose Pixels. And now when I measure here, you'll notice from there to there is 960 pixels. So the width of this center element here is 960 pixels. So that's why I'm setting it to 960, to match the width of my element there. You'll also notice that if you go look at this image, it's also 960 pixels wide. Okay, and I'm also setting a background color for my whole section, which is really this color here, this brown color. So I'm just going to copy that and set background color to that color. Or you could just go based on what's on the slide here. Background color. Okay, and so that will take this entire section. Margin auto will center it on the page and set the background color and make it 960 pixels. Let's save that. And if we look in live, you'll notice already our design is starting to come together. Or if you look in Chrome and click refresh, it's starting to come together. And that's enough for this video. In this video, we're going to get our layout working properly here. So I'm going to set the nav here. I'm going to set it to float left so that that nav is on the left side. And the article is going to float right, so it's on the right hand side. And then the footer is going to clear both the left and the right floats, and set a background color for the footer to match the design that we have there. So let's go ahead and put this in. Nav, float left. It's going to have a width of 340 pixels. The article is going to float to the right and have a width of 620 pixels. 340 plus 620 equals what? 960. That's the width of our entire container. So everything will fit nice and snugly together. Okay? And then the footer has to clear both the left and the right floats. We know that already, so we'll do clear both. And then I'm setting a background color. And I forget what the color is. You could just go to here and put in pound 383 F43 if you can remember that. Or if you have Photoshop, you can go to Photoshop, just use the eyedropper tool, click on this gray color down here, and then click on this thing, and there it is right there, and copy that right out of the Photoshop file. That way I know it'll match. Come back here and put in that background color. If you go back to Chrome and refresh the page, you'll notice now the navigation is floating to the left. I've got these bullets hanging out here. We'll take care of those in a bit. And then I've got my main content over here on the right, and the footer comes after that. Now, just for fun, let's remind ourselves what that clear float is doing. If I take the clear off, watch what happens to the footer. The footer is ignoring the float left and the float right altogether. So everything's getting squunched together. So I need to clear the floats. The floating takes those elements out of the normal flow of the document. The normal flow being displaying the page from the top to the bottom. When you tell something to float left or float right, it takes it out of the normal flow of the document, and the next element ignores it altogether. So we want to add that clear in there to get our footer to go back into the normal flow of the document. So clear both. Fixes that. And now again the footer will be beneath the two floated elements. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is the width here. Again, I said 340 and 620 match up to 960. If I set this to 621, if it's 1 pixel too large, that element no longer fits next to here, so now it's wrapping down. It's still floating to the right, which is why it's over here, but it doesn't sit next to that anymore because it doesn't fit anymore. The width of this plus this is 961, but the container is only 960, so it doesn't fit. So everything has to fit for it to work. You have to do a little bit of math. Luckily it's simple math. It's just adding and subtracting, which is not too hard, thankfully for all of us. Okay, so we've got all of that in place. We've got the basic layout of our page in place, and that's great. Let's stop this video here. Okay, so now what we would like to do is make a little bit of adjustment to our design that we have here. So if you go back and look at our file here, this is running right up against the top of the page, the right of the page, the bottom of the page. I want to put some padding around this whole element. So I'm going to add 25 pixels padding around the entire element. So let's come back to Dreamweaver here and add padding 25 px around the whole thing. Well, now the width of this element is no longer 620 pixels. That's the width of the content. But the element is 620 plus 25 on the left and 25 on the right. So in order to make this content fit, I need to subtract 50 pixels from here. 620 minus 50 pixels is going to be 570. Oops. 570 pixels, so that it fits properly into the space. Let's see how that looks. Much better. Okay, so we got that in place. I also want to put some padding on the footer. Now the footer is a block element that takes up all of the space available to it. So right now it's spreading across 100% of the possible space available to it. Since I didn't specify a size, I don't have to subtract the 50 pixels from the width because I didn't specify a width. It's still going to take up 100% of the space available. So all I need to do is put the padding 25 pixels in there, and that will work for the footer. Okay, and then next I just want to add a little bit of styling for the H2 for the header and for the paragraph. Margin on the bottom 16 pixels. So let's just go ahead and add this stuff here. So the font size for the H2, let's come down here. Sometimes on my style sheets I'll make a section. You can make a comment here like this. Typography. This is a comment in CSS. You really just need a slash and a star, and then a star and a slash. The extra stars here just sort of separate this thing out, make it look good there. H2. Font size 32px. Why 32 pixels? Well, if you come back to the design over here and click on the T tool over here and click in here, look up there, 32 pixels. And here's the color, as we'll get the color while I'm here. Font size 32 pixels. What else did I set on that? Let's go back and check. Color, margin bottom 16 pixels. I got the color, so let's just add that in there. Margin bottom 16px. I have to add the margin on the bottom because our reset rule up here removed it from all elements. So that removed the margin on the bottom from all elements. So I need to put some back. Okay, and the same thing with the paragraphs. P margin bottom 16px. Now you might be wondering where I get the 16 pixels from. I have not specified a size for my fonts up here. I didn't say I want my font size to be, I could have added font size 16 pixels in here. But by default, most browsers will render your default size at 16 pixels as it is. So my default size for my font is already 16 pixels. So down here when I'm adding 16 pixels to the bottom of paragraphs, it's putting like a full line between the next paragraph. And here 16 pixels is basically half the height of the actual font, which is a pretty good guess for what I want. Okay, so let's take a look and see how that's going. Looking much better. Looks like I need to do something over here to make this thing fit a little bit better. I'll worry about that later. But that's enough for this video. We're getting closer to our design, but I think I want to move my content a little bit closer to this border line here. So I want to make my article a little bit wider. I'm going to make it wider by 20 pixels. So if I come back here and add 20 pixels, because this thing is wrapping and I just want to move that over a little bit here. If I come back here and add 20 pixels to the width of my article, make this 590, then on my nav I need to subtract 20 pixels so that it still fits. And we'll see how that looks now. Let's take a look. Oops, I didn't mean to close the file. There we go. That's fitting a little bit better. Alright, good. So we've got that. And then let's go back to our slideshow and see what we need to do next. Next we need some rules for the navigation. And this is, usually navigation gets a lot of styling. That's kind of typical. So I'm going to make a little section here for my navigation styles. Let's go ahead and add that in. Maybe I'll put it before my typography. Maybe I'll put it right after the nav here, or maybe right before the nav. So it all kind of goes together. You have to decide how you want to organize your style sheet. Alright, so now we've got that. We've got our nav rule, and then I'm going to have nav UL. I think that's what I put over here, right? Nav UL. List style type none will get rid of the bullets. I'm going to put a margin on the bottom of the nav of 60 pixels. That gets rid of the bullets. Margin bottom 60 px. What type of selector is this? Hopefully you're remembering the term. Begins with a C. It's a compound selector. This rule is going to apply to unordered lists that are inside of the nav, not other unordered lists. It's possible that I could have an unordered list inside of my article here that I would want to have bullets on, but this unordered list I don't want to have bullets on it. So this is only going to apply to the unordered list inside the nav. That's a way of, again, one of our big ideas in CSS is specificity. So it's a way of being more specific. I'm specifying just the ULs that are inside of the nav. So we're already using all of our big ideas already, really. We've got the body rule, so we've got elements that are inheriting from that. We've got specificity here, and then also in terms of our typography, the way the paragraphs are being rendered, they're being rendered in a particular color, but also with this margin on the bottom. That means more than one rule is being applied to make the paragraphs look the way they look, which is the cascade. Okay, so with that rule in place, if I click on live for a second, you'll notice the bullets are gone. Okay, let's keep going here. The next thing I want to do for my navigation is I want to apply to the anchor tags that are inside the list items, that are inside the unordered list, that are inside the nav. And I'm just going to go ahead and put this stuff in here, and then we will come back and talk about it. Okay, I've gone ahead and typed in this long rule here. Take your time and go ahead and type all of this in. The display block, setting the background color, which by the way I got from the design over here by using the eyedropper tool. It's a slightly darker brown here for that. Okay. The color of the text, the font weight, the font size, line height. Go ahead and type all of this in. In the next video, I'll explain what each of these things is doing. It's going to take a little bit of time, and this video is already starting to get a little bit long, so I want to take the time to really go through this and be careful about why all these things are in here. Also, I've added these extra spacing in here. You don't need to do that. You can type it all in one solid block if you want to. I put the spacing in here because I want to talk about these things in pairs. Okay, I also added this hover rule. This is a pseudo class, :hover, so that when you roll over these things, they'll behave a little bit differently. Let's save this and just sort of see how this is coming out over here. If I refresh, there it is. There's our design. And when I hover over it, you get that background color. That's what the hover rule is providing. Okay, so let's stop the video here, and in the next video we'll talk about what each of these is doing. Okay, so for this video I want to talk about the styling that I have in here. And it's fairly normal for you to have a lot of styling on the anchor tags that are inside of list items, that are inside the unordered list, that are inside the nav. Okay, so it's possible to put some of the styling on the list items, but I try to consolidate it as much as possible on the anchor tag so that if I need to make some changes, I just have one place to go. Let's first talk about display block. Anchor tags, by default, are inline elements. Setting them to display block tells the browser that we want them to display as block elements rather than inline elements. If I were to take this out, you'll notice that I'd have a very different sort of look to my navigation over here. These are no longer block elements, they're inline elements. The border doesn't go all the way across, the background's only on the text, and I have to roll over the text to make it a link. By setting them to display block, it treats them as block elements. The whole block is activated. So now when I refresh this, the border goes all the way across and the whole block is activated. I can activate the link by putting my pointer over here, and it's fairly frequent that you want to have your elements set to block elements, have your anchor tag set to block elements in navigation. Not always, but fairly frequently you want to do that in navigation. Okay, the background color and the color are kind of the normal things. Again, you can get the background color and the color right out of the Photoshop file. Setting the font weight to bold and the font size to bold is about normal as well. Here, this is a little bit different. I set the line height to 60 pixels, and on this design it doesn't really matter, but a lot of times what happens in your navigation is the text will run at the top of the element, and by setting the height to match the line height, it just makes sure that the text is in the vertical center. Again, in this case it doesn't really matter, but I like to put that in there just to be sure that the text is going to be in the vertical center of these elements here, so that the text is right in the middle. Okay, so I put that in there just in case. Text transform uppercase makes all the letters uppercase, so that over here I don't have to worry about the casing of this, so that when it's displayed, it's going to be displayed as uppercase. So there's that. The text decoration none gets rid of the underlining that happens by default in browsers for these things. If I take that out and come back over here and refresh, now I got underlines on my words. I don't really want those. They don't go with my style. So I'm going to undo that. And then I just put a little bit of padding on the left and the border on the bottom. The hover color works well here. So that kind of explains all of the styling for the navigation, which is the big part of styling for this particular design is here on these anchor tags. And that's enough for this video. Okay, so you may notice on our page that we have this weird gap at the top. Let me go back to my design over here in Chrome. Refresh this. You'll notice when I roll over this, I've got this gap up here between the image and the top of my thing. What is causing that? That can drive you nuts. I've known lots of experienced web designers that don't know what is causing that gap. And what's actually causing the gap is that this image up here in my header is actually an inline element, and that gap is being caused by the rest of the line created by that inline element. Okay? It's kind of the rest of the line. So the easy way to fix that is to set the image to display as block. So I'm just going to add this little rule here that sets the image in the header to display as block. Alright, let's go up here. I've got my navigation. I'm going to add it up here after this section here. Header, IMG. So that's the image inside the header. Display block. And then you'll notice over here, when I refresh, it's going to shift a tiny little bit. Boom. And then when I roll over this, there's no gap anymore. That image in the header is a block element, so there's no longer an extra space underneath it. Okay, so that takes care of that. And at this point, what we have here is a pretty good representation of what we have in our Photoshop file. It's looking pretty good. We're basically where we need to be. If you look in our Photoshop file, it looks good. We've got everything pretty much set the way it should be. But there are a few other things that we can do to make this file better. Let's go back to our slides. One thing I'd like to do to make it better is the page really needs an H1, and ideally an H1 is some text that says what the coffee shop page is. But in this case, because I'm just trying to keep the markup and the styling very simple, we just have an image in the header. But I am going to wrap that image inside of an H1. So the H1 is going to contain an image, which is a little unusual, but it's not. For what we're doing today, this is probably the better way to do it, to keep it simple. So I'm just going to type an H1 in here. And it will close the H1 for me, and I'm just going to put this closing one after the image and tab that in. So that at least there's an H1 on the page for the main header, and then there's an article here, and our Google will pick up, we'll pick up this text in the alt tag for the image as my H1 text, kinda. It sort of works, but it's not the best idea. But for right now, just to keep it simple, that's what we're going to do. Okay. And then also you'll notice I don't have an actual link to my home page in my navigation. So I'm going to make that image a link to the home page. I'm going to give it a title, Coffee Shop. You'll see what that does in a minute. So let's go ahead and do that. So around the image, I'm going to add, inside the H1, I'm going to add an anchor tag. And again, it opens and closes. I'm going to put the closing one after the image. Tab this in again. And I'm going to add an href attribute in here. And I'm going to link to this page, index.html. And I'm going to add a title attribute. Something like that. I don't think that matches exactly what's on my slides, but I just called it Coffee Shop here. That's fine. But you'll notice that when we do that, now if I go back to my Chrome here, the header doesn't look any different. But when I roll over it, the whole header is a link. And you'll notice here it's saying Coffee Shop Home. That's what that title attribute does. When you put a title attribute on a link, it'll pop up a little bit of text there. If I were to click it, it would refresh this page because it's linking to this file, Coffee Shop Home. And that'll also help Google pick up this content right here. Again, it would be better if we actually had some text in the H1, but that's okay for this design, for what we're doing here. Okay, also to help Google, I'm going to add a meta tag with the name of description for our page. Up here in the head, I've got this meta tag here. I'm going to add one. Maybe I'll put it right after this one. So it's a meta tag, meta, and then it's got two attributes. calling it description there, but I don't think that's right. Okay, name equals, equals description, and then content. And content, what you would put in here is something that describes your page. A great coffee shop in Sacramento. Basically, Google doesn't use this to help increase the score of your page, but in Google, when you search for something, it has a little content that comes up in that description, and this is that content that shows up here. So having the meta name description is a good thing to put on your page. In the next movie, we'll add links to our additional pages. We'll stop this. Okay, so we've added a meta description with some content that will help Google describe our page well. We've added a link to the home page right here at the top. The next thing we need to do before we start building out the other pages of our site is to fix this navigation here. Once we get this set, we'll be able to actually create our other pages from this page, using this page as kind of a template to create the other pages, because they're all going to look fairly similar. So let's go ahead and do that. If we go back to the slides, you can see here I've replaced the hashtag in here with an actual file name. And these file names, notice they don't have any spaces, they don't have any capital letters. You want to keep it as simple as possible so that you don't have any problems linking to things. So over here, I'm going to come down here and change this one to roasters.html, goods.html, about.html, and events.html. I think that matches what I have on my slides. Let's just check. Roasters, goods, about, events. Okay, good. So we've got all of that linked up. Now we need to create these files. I'm going to save this and come back to my slideshow here. So basically what I need to do is I need to have a file that's a duplicate of this file called roasters.html. There are a couple of ways of doing this. You could do this right in the Finder by clicking on the file and duplicating it and changing the file name. You could do it there. Or you could do it right within Dreamweaver by just doing File Save As and saving this file with a different name. I'm actually going to do that. So over here in Dreamweaver, if I go to File and Save As, or Shift Apple S, and just save this file as roasters.html, that will make this my internal page for Roasters. If we go back to our design over here in Photoshop, you'll notice I have a second design for an interior page. It's got a different header. We've got a little bit more content in here. So I'm going to make this Roasters page look like this. Let's go ahead and do some of that. Come back to my slideshow. I'm going to change the title of the page to Coffee Shop Roasters. And then I'm going to change the header. And I'm going to add some content in on the page that's a little bit different. So let's do those things. So on my Roasters page, Coffee Shop Roasters. And then down here, instead of header image 1, this is just header image 2, which is in my folder already. Slightly different image. So we've changed that. And then down here, I've just got some different content from my page. And I can get that right off of my Photoshop file. And you can, this is just generic content. You'll notice it's just lorem ipsum fake text. There isn't even anything special about this, so you can get text from anywhere if you don't want to get it from here. I'm just going to copy all of that and paste it in over here. And of course then I'm going to have to go through and fix all the paragraphs, which is a little bit of a pain, but just have to do it. Put these at the ends of all of these paragraphs. Put the starting paragraphs at the front. I'm just going to copy and paste. I think I was using some hip strips in here. That's what it looks like. And then I can tab that in. There we go. And then finally I have an additional image down here at the bottom. It's an image tag, the source attribute, images, coffee beans, and alt coffee beans. And now if I go look at this page, you can look at it in the live view here. You'll see it's looking pretty good. That's all fine. I also changed the actual text up here. Let's fix that. Put that inside of the H2 here. Save that. And now our internal page is basically done. So it's all saved. Alright, we'll stop there. Okay, so for the next piece, all we need to do is duplicate the roasters page, because all the other internal pages are going to look like that one, to create the goods, the events, and the about file. And there are a couple of ways, again, that I could do this. I could do it by just doing file save as for the roasters page in Dreamweaver, or I could do it duplicating the file in the Finder. I'm going to actually do it that way just so you can see that way. But the important thing here is that the names of these files have to match exactly the file name that you created, that you linked to over here. So I've got roasters.html, goods.html, about.html, events.html. If you name these files even one character different, your navigation is not going to work. So you need to make sure that everything is spelled exactly the same, that you're using capital letters the same way. I just keep everything lowercase just to make sure it's nice and simple. But let's go ahead and do that. So I need goods, about, and events. So here I can just come to roasters, and on the Mac you can do Command D. On Windows you can copy it with Control C and paste with Control V. But I can just do Command D and change the name of this to goods. And then I can do it again, either this one or this one. They're both exactly the same file, really. Duplicate, about, and duplicate again, events. Okay, now finally, just so I can make sure that this is all working, this should all be working now. So if I actually go back to my Chrome here, I'm on my index page, refresh this. If I click on roasters, the roasters page is coming up. Now the goods page will look exactly like the roasters page because it's just a duplicate of that file. But if I click it, I can see up here it's actually showing me the goods.html file. You can see it up here. Shop, happening. It still says roasters up here on the tab. So I'm just going to fix those little things by opening up each of these files in Dreamweaver. Alright, So I've got them all open here. I can come over here to each one of these about and change this to about. Change this to events. Change this to goods. And then down here you could also, change this text if you wanted to. You can change whatever content you want on the page, and that will make each page different. Okay, that's about it for this video. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so now our site is essentially done. It's all looking really good. There's just a few other things I want to show you really quickly, but let's just check it out as it is here. So here we are at our home page, and that's looking pretty good. We can click on our roasters page, our baked goods page, our about page, our events page, and everything is all linking well. I can click on I can go from any page to any other page. Everything is linked and working properly. So that's great. Okay, so what else do we need to do? One last thing that I want to do really quickly is replace the very basic CSS reset with one that's a little bit more production friendly. The one that we have here really shouldn't be used on a production site. It's okay for us for just sort of getting started on this stuff. Whoops. But it's not very good. This is not a very good reset. It'll cause problems specifically for form elements and stuff like that. So what do real web designers use? If you go back to the slides, there's a link here. Eric Meyer is sort of the granddaddy of this thing. Whoops. Apparently that is not linking right. But we can just go and Google Eric Meyer CSS reset. And the very first link that comes up is his CSS reset. And this whole long thing, all the way down to here, is the CSS reset that a lot of web developers have been using for years. So I can copy that and put that in place of over here. So I'm going to delete this CSS reset here. I'm just going to delete it. Oops. Delete. And then I'm going to paste in his CSS reset. Maybe I'll put a comment first. Eric Meyer CSS reset. Paste that in there. And then that reset ends here. So I'll put most of the other websites that we create will have this reset on it. And what it does is it says all of these elements, set the margin and padding to 0, removes borders, does a whole bunch of basic stuff, and will reset the CSS for your page. One of the reasons why you want to do this is in an attempt to make sure that your website looks the same across browsers, then you want to reset down to a very base level so that all the browsers will look the same, because different browsers have different style sheets built into them, and so that will help with that. Another technique that's become popular these days is called a normalized CSS. Instead of resetting the CSS, you normalize it between browsers. But while we're learning, I think the reset is the better thing to use, because it just takes all the styling out, and then you can very specifically put in the styling that you want. Okay, so that's in place, and you'll notice that if we go back and look at our pages, a few things have changed a little bit. Like now we've lost the bold on this thing. We've also lost some line height on our paragraphs and that kind of stuff. So it needs, now our reset is affecting the way our page looks a little bit more drastically than it did before. So we just need to add a few things in here to kind of fix that up. If we go back to the slides here, I added font weight bold into the H2 rule and line height 22 pixels into the paragraph rule. So let's go ahead and do those two things down here and do the typography. Font dash weight bold, line height 22 px on the paragraph. That'll fix those two things. Come back and refresh this. And that fixes the styling there. The only other thing we really could do is the reset will remove the bullets from our navigation, so we don't really even need list style none on this anymore. It doesn't hurt if you leave it in there. You could take it out if you wanted to, and that will make that all come together. So there we go. Now we're done. Our whole website is working the way we need it to.